Hello, everybody, and welcome to our podcast where we're going behind the bench and talking about lab operations. Specifically, we're interviewing a number of leaders in the biotech sphere. And today we're delighted to be joined by John Lunger, who's led manufacturing operations across a number of organizations, across a number of countries. And, the objective is today is to really talk about what goes on behind the scenes and what lessons can be learned and things that can help the next generation of people working in biotech. So thank you, John, for joining us.
Yeah,
Would
thank you.
you like to start by giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself and your career? You've had a really interesting, diverse career. Keen to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Caroline, for having me. So I've been in life sciences now for about 25 or 30 years, but holistically, I kind of divide my career up into three chapters. I started off as in university at the Naval Academy here in the United States and was a nuke submarine officer for the beginning of that. So that was that first third of my life where you learn execution, focus on the mission, you learn how to lead others in uncertainty and those type of things. After that phase, I decided to go back to graduate school. I went to got an MBA at University of Chicago and then moved into consulting for a little bit, but the middle phase was really big pharma. So I spent about a decade with a company called Wyeth Pharmaceuticals, which included 4 or 5 different jobs, all operationally focused, where I kind of went back and forth between staff jobs and line jobs. Spent some time as an expat in Dublin, Ireland, in a small molecule plant running operations there. Pfizer bought Wyeth, and at the end of that, I decided I wanted to try something a little bit smaller, which led to the last third of my career, which has been in biotech. So I've been in biotech now for a little over a decade, 2 different operating roles with 2 different biotechs, and then also a board role with a cell and gene therapy startup. So the kind of military phase, big pharma phase, biotech phase.
Brilliant. So it'd be really cool to know, when you were in the Navy, what lessons did you learn there that you've now taken through in the rest of your career?
Yeah, I think mission driven and execution driven. I tell a story about where I really learned that. We were out at sea, on a submarine. We're about 2,000 miles away from land and about 700 feet underwater. And at the time, I led the team that was responsible for maintaining all the electrical equipment on the boat. We had a machine that went down. And one of my senior technical leaders was in there, his elbows deep in a machine. He told one of his helpers, hey, I need a 1/4-inch spanner, a 1/4-inch wrench to go fix this machine. And the guy ran off and he came back and said, I couldn't find it. And he used more colorful Navy language than this, where it comes from. But I need the wrench. Like there is no, I can't find it. We're in the middle of nowhere. And if we don't fix this, it's not going to go. So, and ultimately, figured out how to do it. So I think that the lessons there are, the grit, determination, the fact that everything is solvable. And in some cases, it has to be solved. So those are some of the big things. Leading others where you don't have the depth of technical expertise is probably the lessons that I learned. As an officer, and it's common across all military. Your job is decision-making, alignment, motivation, and you rely on the experts that have a depth that you don't have. So you have to approach that with some humility, but also you need to gain their confidence in your competence. So that's kind of the execution phase that I learned out of the Navy.
Brilliant. I love the stories of the submarines. So that was very mission driven, and it's about execution. No matter what, you've got to find the solution. I really firmly believe that pulls into sort of small biotech as well. There's always a solution if you're willing to look hard enough. What did you learn from big pharma that you could take into biotech?
Yeah, I mean, big pharma was understanding the end game, I suppose, right? I mean, a lot of biotechs, the end game is hopefully to be in a position where you're selling something and making some profit. So, it was certainly foundational in terms of my technical experience. That's where I learned about operations in depth, time in a facility, managing a small molecule plant. You learn all the tools that come with big pharma, Six Sigma, all of the kind of technical things that you learn. But then you also learn about getting things done through influence, navigating a large company and trying to find those ways to deliver when you don't have direct control over things. Some people call it politics. Other people call it just getting things done in a large organization. You have to realize that that's part of the job. You have to figure out how to deliver your expectations when you're competing with others. So the technical understanding and then the, how to get things done in a big company.
Brilliant. So if we now think about biotechs and juggling right? You've worked in some large organizations such as the military and big pharma, and then you've come into biotech where everybody's got to wear many hats.
Yeah.
You've got to, if you don't have that expertise, you've got to learn pretty damn quick. Tell us what a day in the life of biotech looked like in a sort of scaling cell therapy manufacturing environment.
Never enough to do what you want to do, and what you sort of need to do. So biotech. So going from big pharma, I had a little bit of a time with a private equity owned portfolio company that was very margin driven. Very
Yeah.
much of a hardcore business, and then a decade of biotech where most of that time we didn't have a top line. So biotech is about. I usually describe it as it's an experiment, not necessarily a business. So from an operations perspective, the things you need to do to execute that experiment, you have to do them as quickly as possible. And efficiency almost is not one of those things that you think about in most biotechs. It's about speed to data, and data is the next inflection point, and it's the next time we can potentially get investors to fund the next evolution of the experiment. So it's always about the trade-offs that are made. And operationally, when you're in biotech in the role that I was in, which led the CMC teams, there are things you have to do, right? There's regulatory requirements that you have, and your job is to develop the product and sell and get the product out there to the clinic. In big pharma, you had resources to pull on. You always talked about redundant supply chains, second sources, reduction of supply risk. You have those same concerns, and you know what the answers could be if you were big pharma, but you have to weigh the investment in those redundant supply chains or those efficiencies or the long-term thinking a lot. So I found that transition into an environment where you no longer have a top line, and all you're trying to do is achieve the experiment to get to the next inflection point, to be very, very different and require you to make very, very different investment decisions.
How did you go about making those kind of relentless and impossible decisions?
Yeah.
But you have to prioritize.
Yeah, you do. And it's one of the things I think that came pretty early. And, most of my biotech experience, my last 8 years with Adaptimmune was autologous cell therapy, which is where you have one patient, one batch, you collect starting material from the patient, re-engineer that, freeze it, and give it back. So a very complex supply chain. And pretty quickly, you're at the limits of what you can do with a group of people in a room on paper, right? Once you get to 8 to 10 batches a month, it becomes so complex. You've got to invest in the systems and the tools to be able to manage that. So, but at the same time, you don't know if your science works yet. So there is still a high likelihood that you invest all that time, effort, and energy, and at the end of the day, your science doesn't work, and that's money that you wasted. So you have to have an enterprise view. You have to be able to understand all of the elements of the investments that you're trying to make, the clinical plans, the investment plans, and use the data in front of you to understand where are we as an enterprise, what's our balance sheet look like, what's our enrollment look like, and make the trade-offs. So it comes down to, I think, judgment, but also having that enterprise view, and how you get that enterprise view, meaning how do you understand your enterprise
Yes.
and how they're executing is important.
What were the things that you really relied on inside of the organization to help you with those decisions?
Yeah. So one is the hallway conversations. Biotech still is relatively small. So as a leader, right, you get your information on how things are going in your business from the people that you talk to. But with that complexity that I mentioned, you have to put in some governance systems pretty quickly. So scorecards and dashboards, metrics. What are we trying to achieve? How are we doing against those goals? Where are the gaps? How do we close the gaps? We had to come up with some fit for purpose governance models that enabled us to make sure we weren't missing some of the views of the enterprise as we made those trade-offs.
Putting in place all those scorecards and governance models, it seems like really common sense. The reality of actually making that work is a lot harder, and getting everybody to actually use the metrics but also use their judgment. How did you make that work?
Well, it kind of goes back to the influencing. I think I'll give you a couple stories there. I tried in one of my early biotechs to implement. Some of your listeners here or viewers might be familiar with the Oliver White sales and operations planning. I learned that in big pharma. It's a pretty big, robust, formulaic method to govern your business, and has a lot of scorecards, dashboards, timelines. I tried to put that into a biotech, and I got a lot of pushback. Culturally, it doesn't really fit with a biotech, and usually a biotech is there's scientists who are solving problems. Structure, hierarchy, discipline is not something that they like or want. And in that particular case, it failed to gain any traction. It just came across as, this is too much. We don't need this. We don't need this kind of governance. So I learned to scale that back the next time I tried it in my next biotech, which is listen to the problems that people have, the lack of decision making, the lack of alignment, the siloed thinking. Those are the usual things that bubble up as organizations get larger, and say, well, I can help you solve those problems. And you have to paint a vision of the future where those problems are solved and fill in the gap for them. So it was a little less top down, a little more listen to what they need, help them solve a problem, and adjust something that is fit for purpose. While as a operations person, I love metrics and scorecards and dashboards and process, recognizing that you got to meet them somewhere in the middle that helps solve their problem without going to the degree that might be my happy place when it comes to those kinds of tools.
Yes, and how when you set all of those up, obviously the nature of the scaling a GMP operation, which is really dynamic, how did you evolve the governance as you needed to make necessary changes?
Well, I'll speak to the Adaptimmune story. Right, Adaptimmune started as when I joined in 2017. We had one one product running one trial in the United States. And when I joined, a decision had been made to begin to internalize manufacturing. We were beginning to have multiple programs, 3 different programs, and we wanted to run trials that included sites in Europe, Canada, and the U.S. So the complexity was gaining steam there. So it was to start with that first, what are we trying to achieve? I think very much about the idea of really having a conversation around what are our goals? How will we know when we're successful? And that manifests itself as key metrics. Those are the scorecard. That's how you knew you had a good day. So spending some time, when I say time, I'm talking about a couple 3-day workshop with the senior leaders, getting together and brainstorming on how will we know when we're successful and what will it look like? And that is really just defining the end game. And then you got to figure out how will we monitor ourselves on the execution of the work to deliver the end game. And that's another set. That's a dashboard.
So, John, you've talked a little bit about scorecards. Tell us a bit about how you'd actually use them in operation with a bit more detail.
Yeah. So scorecards and dashboards. I sometimes I call this my white whale. Anybody who's worked with me knows that I'm continuing to pursue the perfection of a system that includes scorecards and dashboards. So a scorecard is what communicates to an organization, really, I think 3 things. What is important to us? What is the priority of those? And what are the results that we expect? So it's really generated by leadership, right? They have to start with why are we doing anything? What does success look like? So think about, in the case of a scorecard, you might have 6, 7, 8 different things that are important to you. Sales, margins, number of customers. You have to think about those metrics that define success for your business. Then the next thing you decide about is how important are those? Really important? Not that important? All of our effort should go toward margin expansion, or all of our effort should go toward top line growth, or how do we split about it? And that takes a lot of conversation. And then you decide, what does great look like? What does good look like? What does just doing your job look like? So oftentimes you'll have level 5 performance, blowing it out of the water is if our sales grow by 200%. We expect sales to double, but if they go by 300%, that's really great. So there's a lot of conversation with your leadership team on what's important to us, how important is it, what are the priorities, and what does success look like? So that takes quite a bit of time to align on that. Then the next thing is a dashboard, which is what are you going to look at to know if you're moving towards your goals? In a business context, what are those things that will tell you you're achieving, you will be able to deliver the results that you have? So if you think revenue, top line revenue is one of those key metrics, what are the things that will enable that? Number of customers, number of calls, perhaps your average selling price, thinking about all these other things which you need to know about in order to then take action on. So in the business context, you may find that your dashboard metric is telling you that you're not going to deliver your results if you don't fix this problem. And sometimes the fix is obvious. Sometimes the fix means I need to commission a team to go off, investigate root cause, corrective action, take that action, fix it, and go back. So that's the idea of scorecards and dashboards. And I think aligning organizations to make it clear that the scorecard, that's what tells you this was a good year, even down to the level of you as an individual had a good year in your performance of what we asked you to do. And then a dashboard, what information do you need to keep an eye on to know that you're succeeding? And when the dashboard tells you, hey, something's going wrong here, do you have the information you need to fix it? Because that gap between what we want to achieve as an organization and what we are achieving, management's job is to close the gap, full stop. Right? You either say, well, we're not going to double sales this year. We're going to have to reset our expectations and update our earnings guidance. Or I know why we're not achieving, and I'm going to put in place actions to bring my performance back to where I want it. And that is the rhythm of management of a business, is closing that gap between truth as we know it and what our expectations are. That kind of simple when you put it out there, putting that in place, to think deeply about what success looks like, to think deeply about what do we need to look at to ensure we're achieving it. That takes some time, but once that gets in place, then it's just a, rinse and repeat rhythm to that.
Churning the handle, exactly. And did you even go as far as using that kind of analogy for personal appraisals and reviews?
We did. I mean, it is
The
something
same.
that, it's a culture of discipline and metrics and numbers that some people react to, some people don't. Thankfully, within the operations world, technical world, you tend to find people that is their happy place. They want the numbers. They want to know what's happening. So it's not as much of a leap for other organizations where people who are drawn into, whether it's, research is one of these places, I think, which is not necessarily as metric, operationally mission driven as you find in operations.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to tailor it to the appetite, I think, of your people that you're working with.
And I think, if you want performance across the individuals drives performance across the business. I quite like that idea of painting out the picture of what does acceptable look like versus good versus great, to give people things to aim for.
I do believe you can metric anything. People will push back on that, but yeah, my family doesn't like it when I talk about how I put the metrics on the vacations and what is our goal and what are the things we need to do to achieve our happiness on vacation. They like, Dad, that's a little much. But you need to understand, if we're not achieving the plan that we thought we were going to achieve, we need to either change our objective, or we need to understand why we're not there, and we need to close the gap on that. So one is make sure we're aligned on what the goal looks like and what a good day looks like. And then the second is, how do you monitor the day-to-day to know you're executing the plans which are going to achieve those goals? And if you're not doing that, then you need to change. So I think it was a combination of get everybody aligned on the goals and then institute this rhythm so that you're spending less time on the churn and more time on the actual work of moving the ball downfield.
Yes, and I think something that you said there, I think, is really pertinent, which is the investment of time, really painting the picture of what you're aiming at. And people might think, you really, like, 3 days, a 3-day workshop, that's a significant investment in time, especially when everybody's a bit like go, go, go. But I think you're right. It's actually about solid investment in painting the picture, and how you're going to get there and how you're going to measure success is worthwhile doing.
Oh, and then the leader's job is to continue to emphasize where we're going as you're in the middle of a year or whatever your cycle that you like to think about it is. You realize that the leader's job, especially in technical organizations where technical leaders have a tendency to try to solve the problem technically as opposed to do their job, which is to lead others. Communication, alignment, resource allocation, those are leaders' jobs. And when you're in a technical business and you've probably grown up to get to that job through a technical path, recognizing that your job is now leadership, it's not technical problem solving, and the day-to-day of a leader is a very different day-to-day than a technical problem solving day. I find that is rare and oftentimes overlooked and misunderstood in technical roles, because you do get promoted based on your technical competence and your ability to address technical things, but then you're asked to be a leader where the skills are much softer than they are at solving problems. So it's a hard transition to make, I think, as a leader.
Yes, and I think often stepping back and looking, taking yourself off to the helicopter view is critical, and even getting that initial works out again and refreshing yourself, because everybody loses a bit of sight.
Yeah. I'll give you one story where that came home to me, which was, I spent time, as I mentioned, in a small molecule plant in Ireland, and I went in as a director of about a 200-person plant within a plant. And I was the only American over there. I was fairly young at the time. I had not grown up in a plant, right? I had led technical people. My Navy time gave me confidence that I knew how to lead technical people. And one of my first meetings over there was something was wrong with the tablet press, and it was kicking off tablets in an inappropriate time. And the manufacturing manager was coming to me and was looking to me to solve that problem. I didn't have the technical depth to really engage in that conversation. I had the interest and maybe the aptitude, but I was more interested, like, why is this coming to the director of the department? How did we get here? What management systems failed to get us to where we're having to react to a problem as opposed to preventing it? So I was thinking about the manager and leadership aspects that led to this. Whereas if I had grown up in the plant and had been there for 40 years, I probably would have seen that problem 10 years ago and I would have jumped in and solved it. So it was a real gift for me personally to have spent time not only outside my own country, but in this operational leadership role where I did not have the technical depth, but I had the management and the leadership capabilities, and to address those, because that's the role of a director and of a leader. It's not to solve the problem for somebody else.
Yes, and I think it also plays to this whole operating model, and even thinking about your organizational structure, thinking about getting the right mix of people on your team.
And right, same operational roles. You do two things, right? You run the business and you change the business. That's what you do every day. You
Yeah.
execute the day-to-day tasks to deliver value, and then you improve to get better, faster, quicker, cheaper. And your organizational structure needs to recognize that if you spend all your time running the business, it's the classic, we're building the plane while we're flying it, or we don't have time to improve the business. I really think, even in a small biotech and small companies, you have to have someone who comes to work every day thinking about how to make it better and drives to make it better. Because the idea that you want to ask your people to do both, run the business and change the business, run the business always wins, right? It always wins, and there's always a fire to put out.
Absolutely.
And then you never dig yourself out of the hole. And then that's an investment in the biotech world where every dollar's scarce, convincing others and focusing on that. Even in that world, investing in that change the business. It can be one or two people. It doesn't have to be huge, but someone who comes in every day with a passion for making things better.
Yeah.
It yields benefits well beyond what you think it would.
Yeah. And if you could give any one piece of advice about somebody who was in a similar role to yourself, doing cell therapy or setting up a GMP manufacturing or scaling GMP manufacturing, what kind of one or two pieces of advice might you offer?
The first would be that enterprise view that I spoke about. If I sat in another conference where someone said, think about CMC early, put in redundancies, it's not that those of us in those chairs are ignorant of those ambitions. It's that as an enterprise, you've got to understand the resource trade-offs that you're making, and recognizing that how do you balance the investment in that future, knowing that you're not sure the future is going to be there, and how are you going to spend the money now in a reasonable way that gives you a chance to hit that next data inflection point. So you have to understand the entirety of the enterprise. And when I say that, that means you need to understand your financial situation. You need to understand the clinical objectives you're trying to achieve and weigh that against your functional desire, your functional knowledge that I should have dual sources for critical materials. Okay, that's great, but you really need to spend money on patient enrollment, and that's perhaps the more critical thing now, and therefore we're going to take some risk on the supply chain. So enterprise view, get the enterprise view and make decisions aligned with it. The second part, I suppose, is always you have to think about scalability. You have to think about long-term. And in CMC and in biotech, if you are successful, you want to be in a position to not have to make dramatic changes to get to the margins that you need or the quality that you need for a commercial product. So it's a little bit of a counterpoint to what I said earlier, which is invest in a smart way, but be aware of what will need to change should you be successful. And again, another story on this that we learned from Adaptimmune, going into the clinic with a new product, you're always making the decision, do you also improve your supply chain at that time? In cell therapy, where technology is rapidly changing, automation's coming in, different ways of delivering your product, should you take a scientific risk on the product at the same time you're taking supply chain risk, where you're introducing new methods of manufacturing or new analytical methods? Or do you go into the clinic with a tried and true way of making a cellular product, recognizing that if we're successful in phase 1, we might have to do a lot of comparability work, or we might have to change our process before we go into phase 2. And that might add another year or two to your time to market. So that decision is a really tough one to make. So having to think about, do you take scientific risk as well as operational risk when you go into the clinic with a new product? That's probably the second big thing that I think I learned. I don't have an answer there, but I just know that those are You have to consider as you head toward the clinic with new products.
And is it ever A or B, or is it a lot of A because you've got to get the data,
Yeah, it's
and
I would
a little bit of plan B and future proofing?
yeah. I mean, my philosophy would be biased toward A.
Yeah.
If you are in a situation where you are a pre-revenue biotech, you're dependent on delivery of scientific milestones to add value and therefore get you to the market, you have to bias toward A and doing it eyes wide open. So that was something that we learned at Adaptamine, and I sit with my development colleagues and say, all right, we're going to use this manufacturing process for our second product. Recognize, let's document this conversation that a year and a half from now, when it's successful and you're wondering why we can't roll right into a phase 3, it's because we
This
made the
is because
decision
the
now.
decision we made. Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. It's not easy running a really fast, dynamic, high growth business of any sort, but
Yeah.
the complexity that, manufacturing and GMP and technical challenges, it's quite daunting, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all about the team, right? And in your last role, you scaled from about 19 people to about 200 people. Is that about right?
Yeah. At the end, yeah, that was our peak.
Yep. Across 2 different countries, across multiple sites.
Correct.
Tell me a bit about your leadership. How did you lead through this growth and change, and how did you adapt as you got bigger?
Uh, yeah. I mean, you are correct. You're trying to find the right people, and right is a broad term. Everyone uses that phrase all the time. Who are the right people? Well, for me, the right people in technical roles and leadership roles are the ones that have that balance of technical depth and EQ skills. So I put a pretty high premium on that. So as I was building the next level of leadership team, I took, for example, I took about a year to find a VP of supply chain, and it was looking for that person who had the combination of technical and EQ. And those are very hard to find. They're very hard to assess, but I put a high premium on that, right? Get the right people in those chairs, the right people for me that I think are the right people, and then figure out what to do with them. So a premium on that EQ side for leaders was something that was important to me. We were, to your point, Adaptamine. We had a facility in Philadelphia. We had a facility in Stevenage. We had a facility in Milton Park, south of Oxford. So keeping both the cultural differences that happen when you have national sites like that within a small biotech was tough. And then I leaned on my scorecards and dashboards and those tools to maintain alignment that way as we went through it. And then you ultimately have to trust and verify, right? You hire people, you tell them what the goal is,
Yeah.
you verify that is with your governance tools, and you just kind of execute. I mean, I was very proud that we had a team that was quite stable over my tenure there. We had a group of senior leaders, even the entire group, once we got it on board, that there wasn't a very high level of turnover, maybe 15% or so. And I was very grateful to have a leadership team that was there for a long time and that we
Yeah.
worked well together.
It's really essential when everything else is changing.
Yeah, that's right.
Good. And obviously there's the good times, but what about when things weren't looking so good? What did you have to do to re-energize the team and realign them to make the
Yeah,
changes
I mean,
required?
autologous cell therapy has, I was going to say, more bad days than good days. I mean, as I mentioned, the supply chain for autologous cell therapy, you can't start manufacturing until you collect the material from a patient. And at that stage, speed is really important. So it's not the case where it's make to order products, if you think about a consumer product kind of thing, but it's make to order when you can't start until you collect something from the patient. So that whole supply chain, that one patient, one batch, turnaround time as quickly as possible, any hiccup in that is a bad day. And we tried to turn products around in about 30 days from the time we collected cells until we got it back to the patient. And you compare that to my prior world in small molecules and biologics, where if you had a problem with the batch, it was best practice to understand what it was within 30 days. Whereas for us, we had to understand the problem, diagnose it, assess the risk to the product, to the patient, make a decision, document that in a GMP way, and move forward. So that can be exhausting. It can be exhausting, and solving those problems can be endless. The thing Biotech has going for it from a people and motivation perspective is that you're close to the patient, right? You are always reminded that this is not necessarily a product. It's almost a piece of a person that you bring into your facility. You adapt
Yes.
the piece of that person, their immune cells, and then you give them back to them. So So that connection to the patient, and also in a clinical trial where you are very much the last hope for many of these patients because they're on a clinical trial because everything else has failed. I think those two things draw people in who have an inherent mission-driven way of working and desire to be part of something a bit bigger than themselves. So the motivation factor is somewhat inherent in people who are drawn into biotech. And then the nuance of autologous cell therapy adds another layer of connection to the patient. I used to say that I would have loved to have figured out a way to have a hologram of a patient sitting in our lobby. So when you come into work and that patient's cells are going through the process, I just had this vision in my head, and I talked about this a lot with my teams, of that person, watching you walk in the front door, go do your job, is they're sitting in the lobby waiting for their
I
immune cell.
need you. I need you
Yeah,
to
right. And
perform
just
for me today.
and so I think that made the motivation part a little bit easier. But it's a well that you couldn't go back to all the time. I will say that too. I think we talked about trying to make the extraordinary ordinary. Right, we had to come up with a way to make this extraordinary product and this extraordinarily complex supply chain ordinary. So you didn't have to go to that emotional well of, if I don't get this product out, this patient might die, right? That's an emotional toll that a lot of people who work in the healthcare field deal with all the time. But in cell therapy, autologous cell therapy, I think our teams dealt with it every day. So you couldn't go to the well all the time, but when you needed to go to it, it was there, and then people stepped up.
How much feedback did you get after the patient received your therapy?
In the clinical world, in the clinical trial world, we knew how the patients were doing. It wasn't a blinded trial, so you did know how they were doing. In the commercial world, once we launched a commercial product, I found that was one of the things that we missed, right? Once you sold the product to the patient, unless like we had cases where we'd see on social, they would post about, I just got my cells and this is great. That was more of the way we found out how patients were doing in the commercial realm versus the clinical side. And we had patients, for example, I remember one of the patients came and talked to our team and visited the site. And she was a cancer patient who brought her children with her.
Wow.
And we were able to put white coats on them. And so your mom's cells came in this door and they went through this device and came out the other side. And, that carried people's motivation for quite a long time.
That's absolutely incredible story.
Yeah.
And to think what a change you've made for that family as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the products, of course, are still out there. The commercial product is still there, and treating patients, and it is really innovative. We'll talk maybe in a little bit about what it means from a business perspective, but from a product perspective, it's amazing technology.
Good. Brilliant. So, reflecting on now the big picture, all of your journeys in life, what pearls of wisdom could you pass on to somebody in a similar role?
That's a big question. I suppose I would be more down toward the stoic philosopher side of life at this phase, late 50s. Think about the things you can control and what you can't control. If you choose to go down this biotech path, it is not a business, it's a science experiment. That's how I think about it. And the role that you like to play is enabling innovative science to give it a chance to get out there. You have to accept the fact that there are a lot of things outside of your control that are going to be roadblocks. I've been part of two biotechs now, which have both gotten commercial products to the market, which you look at all the numbers, that's, call it less than 1%, whatever number it is. It's a rare thing. And I remember both of the approval parties that we had with drinking champagne, and we just couldn't believe that all this hard work brought a product to market. And both of those companies ended up with selling those products to other people, and those companies no longer exist. So they succeeded technically, ultimately didn't succeed from a business perspective. And I think if what drives you is enabling innovative science and being part of that, you have to recognize that what comes with that is a very high level of risk. Adaptimmune, we want it to be big cell, right? We want it to be the company that took cell therapy into not big pharma, but big cell. And I think we did a fantastic job of building the end-to-end capabilities. But at the end of the day, things outside of our control, as well as I would say some decisions we made, led to a business that ultimately didn't deliver what it wanted to deliver for investors or for employees, although it did deliver the products for patients. So I think that's an important thing to consider, because bringing innovative science to the market is very rewarding, and it can be very rewarding technically if that's kind of your bent, and recognize that that 1% is real, meaning that a lot of times it's not going to work out the way you want to. And you kind of have to be ready to play that game.
I think it's the nature. Like, if you want to be at the cutting edge of science, bringing something really unique, life-changing, you are going up against the odds.
Yeah, yeah, and that is one of my other speeches that I often gave to my team was to talk about. You watch the old World War II movies with the old guys talking about D-Day and how that was just a horrible experience, but the most rewarding thing they've ever done, and they feel like they really made a difference. They moved something forward. And I said, if you were the kind of person who watches those old documentaries and you want to be that person in the documentary, you want to be the person 30, 40 years from now saying, I was there in the beginning and it was really hard and we didn't know what we were going to do and we won. To give yourself a chance to win, you have to go through the landing. And there are probably a lot more documentaries that haven't been made about things that weren't successful. But if you want to be in the documentary, you have to give it a go. Right? You don't get a chance to be in that if you don't give it a go. So that was one of my stump speeches. The man in the arena speech. I don't know if this is something that your UK listeners would be familiar with, but there's a famous quote by Theodore Roosevelt, one of our presidents from back in the day, that talks about, paraphrase, it's not the critic who counts, right? It's the person who's in the arena, who's trying, who fails and fails and fails again, but ultimately might succeed, who doesn't die with those souls who've known neither defeat or success. And so that's stump speech number 2, which is, this is the arena, right? Biotech is the arena. It is absolutely in there, putting your effort into something which most likely is going to fail. And if that drives you, it's a great place to be. And if you feel that that's not where you want to be, I think Theodore Roosevelt used the cold and timid souls, right? It is, it's not a judgment, but that there are other paths in life that are probably easier
More
to pursue
suited.
than this one.
Yeah, absolutely. But regardless of, like, I guess when you're pushing the boundaries, there's always a legacy that you leave behind. And it's fantastic, the achievements that you've made. You've changed patients' lives. You've changed the lives of their families. And you've probably changed the life of everybody who was on the journey with you as well, including your
Yeah.
own.
No, you're absolutely right.
You've all come out wiser, stronger, and you're able to pass on that learning into the next, whatever you all do next, as well as sharing some of the experiences to make the next wave of technology better.
Yeah, no, I agree. Right, science builds on the shoulders of people that go before. So it may not have
Absolutely.
achieved all of our ambitions, but I absolutely agree with you, Caroline. I mean, it certainly was the most rewarding time for myself, and the same thing for the patients and the people.
So what's next for you, John? You've got a little bit of a portfolio going on.
Yeah. I mean, doing some of the cell therapy advisory work. I still believe in the cell therapy platform. I still think that's part of the future. So working with some companies, in particular companies that are heading into late stage where operations and CMC becomes critical. So there's a few opportunities there. I'm at the age where you take a little bit of time and travel around and ride your bike and do those kinds of things too. So we'll see. But I'm excited for the future. I'm excited for the technology to keep going. It does seem that cell therapy has had a rough go of it for the last 4 or 5 years, and there's a little bit of the, as they say, green shoots coming out there that the technology is starting to prove itself as a business. So I'm excited about that.
Well, I wish you every success.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay. Bye-bye.